Week 1 of our 30-day grid down cooking challenge has been an epic fail. Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Jonathan, and we are the Provident Preppers. As a family, we decided that we would take the challenge to not do any cooking with electricity for the entire month of November, including Thanksgiving. This means our stove, our microwave, our crock pots, all of it are quarantined. As you can see, this requires more than just being able to light a fire.
Good thing my dad's buff. Check out this week's experiences.
This is our report of our week 1 of our 30-day grid down no cooking challenge. We learned a few things this week. We had thought about calling this epic fail based on the picture. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But instead we'll call it lessons learned, because we have learned a few things this week.
We're going to divide our meals into 2 main groups, indoor cooking and outdoor cooking, and that will kind of help us keep track a little bit better. So let's start off with the indoor cooking. On the first morning of our challenge, we decided to go ahead and fire up the wood-burning cook stove, and we made French toast and scrambled eggs. We heated up the water in the kettle. It was a great breakfast. And while that stove was hot, we decided we would make dinner in the thermal cooker. Thermal cooking is also known as retained heat or haybox cooking. It's a way that you can conserve fuel when your fuel supply is limited and make the best use of the resources that you have. As you can see, we made the turkey soup and we brought it up to a nice rolling boil on the wood-burning stove while it was still hot.
Then we transferred it into the thermal cooker so that it could continue to cook.
And our thermal cooker, it's rated for 6 hours, but we want to make sure that it's going to maintain that heat longer. So I always wrap it in a little baby blanket or some small blanket or towel so that I'm able to extend that life and take that 6 hours and turn it into 10 hours.
And it turned out really great. I was concerned it might just be lukewarm, but it was hot enough that it burned my mouth. So it kept its temperature very nicely for 8 or 10 hours.
And it's just a really nice surprise because it's just this little blanket tucked in the corner and you pull it out and it's hot and ready to go. Breakfast the next day consisted of some of the leftover French toast. Normally we would have put it in a toaster, but that would require electricity. So we just put it in a pan and heated it up that way, along with our eggs and fruit.
It worked out really well.
Well, we didn't heat up the fruit.
No.
We ate that cold. The pressure cooker is another great way to conserve fuel. In this pressure cooker, I am cooking dried beans for dinner. Just by using that pressure cooker, we are using significantly less fuel, maybe 20% of the fuel that we would have used, and yet it softens up even those really tough, old, hard beans.
If you haven't done pressure cooking, this is one you want to look at. This was one of the lunches that we put together. It consisted of onions, mushrooms, and squash sauteed together. It was very good.
We're using the butane cook stove, which quite frankly, we are not a huge fan of for a couple of reasons. One is because you need to ventilate when you're using it indoors. We always made sure that we kept the digital readout carbon monoxide detector nearby. But the other reason is that the fuel is stored in canisters. And so storage of the fuel in that way can be a little bit problematic. But let me tell you something. It produces a nice, hot, instant fire. And Ben took advantage of that butane heater to make sure that he could have some ramen noodles.
This is a Herc oven, and it uses tea lights for the heat source for this oven.
One of the advantages of the tea lights is that they are incredibly safe to store, and they will store indefinitely.
When using this oven, you want to make sure that you stand the wicks up and trim them to 1/4 inch. This is for safety reasons so they don't lay over and catch fire.
Ben is sliding the trays of the lit tea lights into the base of the oven. One slides in on each side of the oven. This week we were able to make some delicious lemon bars that cooked really nice and evenly in the Herc oven. And there's the final product. Yum. We have a tradition on Sunday where a lot of times we eat with family. And so we were going to Grandma's house to eat dinner, and we decided that for our contribution to the meal, we would bring cooked carrots. The carrots from our garden are absolutely incredible. But if you look at that, that's a huge pot of cooked carrots. And we use the pressure cooker because it saves a tremendous amount of fuel. I only have to bring that pressure cooker up to temperature and cook it for 2 minutes. and those carrots are done. And on Sunday night, we had friends over for family night, and we decided that we would cook some popcorn. The popcorn that we popped actually came from a peat bottle where we had stored popcorn back from 2008, and it still popped very nicely. We powdered some pink Himalayan salt, and there is nothing better than popcorn that is cooked in coconut oil with pink Himalayan salt on it. That is really yummy.
So we had our friends over on Sunday night, and they brought cinnamon rolls to cook in our oven.
But the boys were in charge of the cooking. I have to say that.
Yes, we were, and we got a little distracted, and we stoked the fire maybe a little too hot, but that's part of this process, right? This is a learning thing, and we learned that those cremated cinnamon rolls were a result of just not using the stove like we should have done. So we've learned from that. The cinnamon rolls actually turned out really tasty after you cut the top off of them. So we had to... So each roll, when it came out, had to have the top cut off, and then it was very tasty.
I don't know. I refused to try them.
They were good.
What does that say about my cooking if you think my cooking's good and you're eating those?
Oh, yours is much better.
I am an avid herbal tea drinker. I drink those 2 quarts of herbal tea every day. And so there's all kinds of different ways that I've been heating up the water. When the wood burning stove is on, that's what I use. Sometimes I use the safe heat, and on this day I was heating it up using the butane stove.
On Monday morning I used the thermal cooker to cook the oatmeal. Now normally I would do that in the rice pot, but since I can't use the rice pot, I put the ingredients in and poured boiling water over the top, put the lid on and put it in the thermal cooker. It turned out pretty good, but it wasn't quite as gummy. Yeah, it was a little different texture than when it comes out of the rice pot.
And I think that would have totally been changed. Instead of just dumping hot water over it, I think if you would have put that on this butane stove or the safe heat and brought that water up to a boil, then added the apples and cinnamon and oatmeal and stirred it till it came back up to a boil, put the lid on and put it in the thermal cooker, I think it would have not been quite as gummy. But it still was actually really delicious.
Yeah, it was quite good. Bad. And just another application of using thermal retained heat.
And here you can see that we're using safe heat inside of a Timberlit stove to bring some water up to a boil. It's really easy to think that one device is going to take care of everything. But that's not necessarily true. We had made some mashed potatoes in the sun oven, which we'll talk about in the outdoor cooking. We didn't eat them all, so they were in the refrigerator. I wanted to find a way to use these mashed potatoes, but I couldn't heat them up in the microwave. So I decided to make a shepherd's pie, which meant that I needed to brown the hamburger separately. But then I combined the rest of the ingredients and made it into a casserole and put it into the Herc oven, which did a great job of cooking it and heating it all up real nicely. So this was a crazy night for our family. You can see that some of the shepherd's pie disappeared before I ever even had a chance to take a picture. And we had people eating at all different times, and the girls were going to be home really late. Once the shepherd's pie was finished cooking, we took out one of the little racks of the tea lights and just left one in so that it could stay warm. So it was 2 or 3 hours later when the girls had come home and they still had a nice hot dinner. And it took no effort at all on my part. The Herc oven, I think there's a lot of potential here.
This was one of the breakfasts that we cooked with hash browns and scrambled eggs. Normally I would have them on separate burners, but since we only have one burner, we had to do them at separate times.
And these are the potatoes that were cooked in the sun oven. And again, one device doesn't take care of everything, because you can see I'm making the gravy over the safe heat, and then I'm steaming the broccoli on the butane stove. We have to get a little bit creative to be able to accomplish everything that we need to. It's been really difficult not having a microwave to reheat foods. This was some leftover pinto bean chicken, which was fabulous. And so we just dumped it in a pot and put it over the safe heat. The safe heat is really good for reheating foods because the temperature isn't too hot. Yes, it will bring it to a boil, but as long as you stir it every little while, it's not going to scorch, which the butane stove definitely would have a greater possibility of scorching it and would need to be tended better.
Now we're moving to our outdoor cooking portion. You can see here bread that we cooked in the Bear River rocket stove.
The Bear River rocket stove is really a fantastic feat of engineering. Is that what you would call it?
Yeah.
We've got these 2 rockets that you see on the left-hand side that actually make the grill nice and hot. And then the single rocket that you see on the other side is what makes the oven hot. And it just burns the little sticks that you see there on the right-hand side.
It can be a little bit tricky getting all the rockets going and keeping them going and getting everything up to heat because there's a lot of mass there to get warmed up. But once you get that momentum going, it does a fantastic job. And this is a device that you want to plan your cooking with because you've got the grill going, you've got the oven going, so you'll want to plan something where you're using both of those while you've got them hot.
And it is incredibly sustainable because it's just using these little sticks to burn, which means that you could use debris in an emergency type situation, but it's sustainable in our yard because we have lots of tree prunings every year from our fruit trees and other things, which are easily cut down into sticks that could be used to fuel this. For more information about the Bear River Rocket Stove, visit their website. It's a little bit hard to find, bearriverrocketstoves.weebly.com, and we will make sure that we put a link to that in the show notes for you.
This is an applesauce cake that we cooked in our sun oven. Now, generally when we're cooking in the sun oven, the ideal UV index is between 7 and 10. Our index was 3 that day.
Because it's November. It's cold here.
Right. So our outside temperature were around 55 to 60, but we were still able to bake at 300 degrees, and this turned out wonderfully well. Solar cooking is amazing because of that abundant free fuel that resides safely on the sun, and it just does an amazing job. So whenever we can, we use the sun oven.
That same day, we were able to make a couple loaves of pumpkin chocolate chip bread using only the energy of the sun. Another day, we decided that we would make mashed potatoes using the sun oven. When John checked the UV index, it was actually only 1, so we were a little bit worried. It looked sunny outside, but the UV index makes a big difference. So we decided we were going to go ahead and give it a try. And in the pot, we put potatoes with some salt and water. But then I wanted more of a roasted flavor for my garlic mashed potatoes. So in a little piece of aluminum foil, we put some chopped onions and garlic to kind of be more roasted flavor in there. And the UV index did get up to 3. It only got up to about 250 degrees, which is fine for making mashed potatoes. However, I got distracted and I didn't go out and check on the mashed potatoes, and the sun had moved and I didn't actually move the sun oven or the solar cooker to align with the sun, so it took much longer to cook than it should have.
That was another lesson learned, that when we're using the sun oven, we just have to set a timer or whatever to remind us to go out and re-aim the oven.
But the energy is free. It's incredible that you can put this box out there and it cooks your food for you.
Pretty amazing.
We are disagreeing on a point, and we need for you guys to resolve it for us to save our marriage. This is very important.
Well, I don't think it's quite that serious yet.
This is serious for me.
Okay.
All right. You explain it. I'll keep my mouth shut for a moment.
Okay, so on our wood stove, we have what is known as a magic heat. You can see it with the arrow pointing to it. And what that does, it reclaims heat out of the stack. This is heat that would go up and out the chimney and would be lost. So that heat reclaimer pulls that heat, and it has a fan that blows that heat into the room. And it really does a very nice job of adding heat to our home. Kylene felt like because that was sitting on a cooking device that it shouldn't be allowed to be used.
Let me explain my own feelings here.
Okay.
In a grid down situation, that magic heat could not stay on there because the fan that's inside would melt and it would render my wood burning stove useless. I could not safely use that stove. So I think we should pull it off. And so can you see the black stack that's right there waiting to find out who gets to win this conversation? I think we should do real grid down. But Jonathan thinks there should be an exception made because he has his own point of view.
The reality is she doesn't want to do grid down.
I don't want to
She made that very clear that this is not a grid down. We're not losing our fridge, our lights, our furnace, or anything else. And so, in my opinion, this is part of the heating system, and it would be a waste. It would be an absolute waste, a travesty.
In my opinion, it's cheating.
To not reclaim that heat.
It's cheating. Okay, so we'll stop our arguing, and what you get to do is in the comments below, tell us whether you think we should be allowed to use the magic heat or whether we should pull it off and go grid down.
We welcome your comments.
There are some things that not being able to have electricity just makes so much more less convenient. One of the things that's a little bit rough for me is that when I use the cast iron cookware, it's harder to clean out. This pan had eggs in it and I had to put it back on the stove with water, let it heat up so that I could clean it better. I'm lazy.
Well, I don't think you're lazy, but it does take a little more work. We're used to having
non-stick pans.
We're used to having non-stick pans and having all these things that are so convenient, and sometimes it won't be as convenient. Speaking of inconvenient, we were hoping to pull out some...
Remember the French toast? It was supposed to have berry jam on it.
Normally we get that out and we warm it in the microwave for a couple of minutes so that it's ready to use.
And we defrost it.
Guess what? No microwave. So
the next day we were able to have it. But not that one. Oh, and it was really funny. I was working and all of a sudden I hear this, I'm like, John, are you okay? I just got a burrito out and I can't put it in the microwave. So I'm not the only one that's missed the microwave.
That's right. That was first day. And I even pulled the sign off the microwave accidentally. I just grabbed the handle of the microwave and pulled the door open. It's like, oh, whoops.
Yeah, because the breaker's off on both the stove and the microwave, so you can't cheat. You can't.
Nope, no cheating. But it goes to show how we are just conditioned to doing things certain ways. And this is good for us to learn. Okay, now we have to think differently.
I cannot tell you the number of times I look to see what time it is, and I can't. Because there's no clock on the microwave, and there's no clock on the stove. There's no timer when I want to time my bread for 45 minutes. And there's no light or fan. And it's interesting. Yes, it's an inconvenience. But it's been 5 days now, and I'm still looking for the time on that clock.
One of the things we realized is we needed more lighters. We had a couple sitting around, but they rapidly failed on us. And so we were using matches, which is not nearly as convenient.
No, in fact, it's kind of dangerous. We decided we went and we bought a ton of them because we should have had more in our storage, right? We're preppers. We need a backup and a backup for our backup. And we should have had a year's supply, at least, of butane lighters. So we're going to do a video that compares. We'll see which ones I like better and which one he likes better.
And we need more fire starters. To light the Bear River rocket stove, we like these little fire starters that we've made out of an egg carton and some wax with paper and other things, lint or other things in with it. And of course, I have to do the safety report, and I am proud to say that carbon monoxide detector never went off of 0. Now, Ben did burn his hand slightly on the popcorn bowl that was left on the wood stove. Another learning experience, but nothing serious. This is our fuel usage report, and when we look at this chart, when you see those numbers under different columns, those represent not necessarily the quantity used, but the number of times we use those on those given days. So you can see on the wood there, we used about 1/5 of a rack. Now initially I was going to weigh all the wood that we used. Well, that got old in a big hurry. So we decided we'd just use a rack. We've got a firewood rack. So we've used about 1/5 of that rack of firewood. We've used about 1/4 of a bucket of sticks or kindling for the Bear River rocket stove. Now, when you think about that, that's pretty amazing to have 1/4 of a bucket be able to cook those 2 loaves of bread, in addition to heat that grill, which we didn't use at that time, but that's a lot of cooking for just a little bit of kindling. We've used the butane stove probably the most. We will probably try and diversify that a little bit more and use some of the other things. You can see that we haven't used propane yet, but we will be using that. We use the solar oven 3 times. That is an amazing source that draws all that free energy. Also, the safe heat there, we've used that a couple of times. And then the candle oven, we've used that a couple of times. So that is our report of fuel usage. We'll probably try and refine this a little bit. We want to keep track of how much fuel we are using so that we can plan for that. We invite you to check out some of the other resources that we have. Google the Provident Prepper 30-Day Grid Down Emergency Cooking Challenge. That is a better description of the challenge that we're engaged in right now. Also, these YouTube videos, Emergency Solar Cooking and Fuel Storage Life. These provide a lot of great information on this very subject. We encourage you to visit theprovidentprepper.org and also our YouTube channel, The Provident Prepper. The time to tackle this learning curve is right now, while both food and fuel are plentiful. This is not something that we want to be trying to learn in a crisis situation.
And now for the question of the day. My parents need their conflict resolved. Should we be able to use magic heat or not? Comment below. And thanks for being part of the solution.